Gentleman yields back his time. I now recognize Representative Steve Chabot of Ohio, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Asia, the Pacific, Central Asia, and Non-Proliferation for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On August 16th, Mr. Secretary, President Biden said that the administration had considered every contingency and was executing the evacuation according to your plan. Was it part of your plan to rely on the Taliban to ensure the safety of Americans trying to flee the country? Because that's what happened.
We, through the course of the spring and summer, did indeed, as the president said, look at every contingency for dealing with our drawdown. And
we relied upon the Taliban to be our security. In essence, we ended up getting 13 of our military personnel and over 150 Afghan civilians killed by relying upon the Taliban. They didn't provide very good security. We never should have relied upon them. Let me move on my second question.
We were not relying upon the Taliban. As you know, what happened was the Afghan security forces and the government collapsed within the space of 11 days. We then executed the plans that we had in place to safely draw down our embassy, move it to the airport. The military came in, took over the airport, and started getting evacuation flights out within 72 hours. Those were the plans that were in place.
We certainly relied upon it at the airport. It didn't work out so well. Mr. Secretary, President Biden has laid the blame for the evacuation debacle in Afghanistan on others rather than on himself, where it really belongs. He blamed President Trump, as we've discussed already to some degree here, basically claiming that he was just following Trump's policy. But he hasn't hesitated to disregard every other major Trump policy, our southern border, the Keystone Pipeline, the Paris Climate Accord, the Iran deal, Mexico City policy, and on and on. Yet this was the one Trump policy that he had to follow. Do you understand why this is pretty hard to fathom for a lot of people?
I think what's perhaps, Congressman, hard to fathom, or people just don't understand, is that the agreement reached by the previous administration required all U.S. forces to be out of Afghanistan by May 1st. In return, the Taliban stopped attacking our forces, our partners, and it didn't commence an onslaught of the Afghanistan cities. Had the president not followed through on the commitments that his predecessor made, those attacks would have resumed. We would have re-upped the war in Afghanistan after 20 years for another 5, 10, or 20 years. We would have had to send more forces back in. And I recognize that a lot of people don't understand that, don't know the agreement that was reached, and the choice that President Biden faced for May 1st.
Let me ask you this. When he wasn't blaming Trump, he was blaming the Afghan military forces for allegedly not being willing to fight. But whereas we had suffered a single U.S. military death in a year and a half, and that's a wonderful thing, the Afghan military forces had lost about 3,000 of their military personnel during that same time. So wasn't the president being a little unfair to those 3,000 Afghans who lost their lives fighting the Taliban during that period of time?
Congressman, many Afghan soldiers fought with incredible bravery and gave their lives. You're right. But as an institution, after 20 years of investment by the United States, by the international community, hundreds of billions of dollars, equipment, support, training, as an institution, it collapsed in 11 days.
Mr. Secretary, we went into Afghanistan in the first place because the Taliban had harbored al-Qaeda, correct? And they attacked us on September 11th. Now, 20 years later, we have the Taliban back in charge there, and they have billions and billions of dollars worth of our equipment and our weaponry. And once again, they're a haven for terrorists. How is this not a debacle of monumental proportions?
Congressman, as we were discussing a little bit earlier, the al-Qaeda, the group that attacked us on 9/11, long ago was vastly degraded to the point where it is currently not capable in the assessment of our intelligence agencies of conducting an externally directed attack against us or against others. The Taliban should remember as well what happened the last time it did, as you rightly said, harbor al-Qaeda, and it engaged in an outwardly directed attack against us. it knows the consequences of continuing to do that. And it has made commitments not to allow that to happen. But of course, we're not relying on those commitments. As we discussed a little bit earlier, we are putting in place what we do in countries around the world where we don't have boots on the ground, which is an over-the-horizon capacity to detect the reemergence, should it happen, of any threat, including from Al-Qaeda, and the means to do something about it.
This
Gentleman's
pullout
time
was
has
complete-
expired.
Yes.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative Ted Doyle.